This is a video about how I was constructively dismissed from King's College London in 2013, where they had me living homeless on the streets. This fact can be proven with this email from Student Advice. Hi William. Yes, it was sent on Monday. I've included copies of bank statements and another briefer letter emphasising some of your circumstances, i.e. that you have on occasions been rough sleeping and living a cash-in-hand existence. If by on occasions they mean nearly every night, lying down on the concrete and having that moment of dread in the ephemeral as the freezing cold moisture soaks up through the denim of my jeans, every single morning using the last pence I had in order to go into the toilet next to the London Eye so I could strip naked and warm myself by placing the hot water over myself, paying attention to my blood-deprived hands due to a medical condition that the university knew I had, called Raynaud. Then yes, they are right, but at least they are willing to admit I was rough living while at the university, which is something. I'm also making this video in an attempt to some sort of cathartic release in response to Student Finance's response to my 33-page dossier, which consisted of past emails showing that they knew I was rough living while at the university, while at the same time telling me that they were in touch with Student Finance England and sorting out a loan, and I will be getting it anytime soon, saying statements like, "This time next week," even though they knew I wasn't going to be getting it because they wasn't in touch with them. And their response to this just being, "We don't take screenshots of past emails. What you have to do is to get in touch with the university and get them to write on headed paper that they constructively dismissed you. Why don't you ask an elderly old lady using a Zimmer frame to jump 50 feet up in the air and do a flip as if their abilities go beyond that of a Chinese gymnast?" Because both are equally possible. This is what constructive dismissal is. Constructive dismissal is when an authority changes, in this case, students' education and living conditions with the aims to force them to leave. The reason they do this instead of just throwing them out is so that they can appeal to the half-truth by claiming, "You voluntarily left, sir," which is true, but they missed out the fact that I voluntarily left after, where they placed me in a situation where I had to live homeless on the streets and in homeless shelters, where I would get attacked by fellow residents, where I would have to brush off the cockroaches when I woke up every single day, where I would have to cancel showers due to the fact that I was used needles in the tray, and also use tampons in the sink, making it impossible to use that as well, where I would have to carry 35 kilograms of university books on my back every single day, all day long, as I couldn't leave them on the streets or in homeless shelters because they would get robbed. Also a situation where I had a plastic bag placed over my head, and all of this with the added effect of the total gaslighting coming from the staff at King's of, "You're coming over really confusing by pointing out our logical fallacies and oxymorons, etc., etc." They are not going to admit to this. They are not going to go through all this trouble to make it look like I voluntarily left just to admit with one simple phone call on headed paper that I had no choice but to leave. Anyway, I'm going to break this up into 4 stages. First, being my college education in Manchester. Second, being my first year at King's. Third, being my second year at King's. And fourth and last, being my third year where I got constructively dismissed. I started my education in Manchester, doing an access course in combined science. And also on the side, as an external candidate, I did an A-level in maths. It was the academic year of 2009 to 2010, and during this year, a weather phenomenon happened, which the media called the Big Freeze. Due to this, out of a class of about 35 people, only 3 turned up, As only 3 turned up, the teacher refused to teach any lessons. This carried on until the end of the year, when the teacher said that you have worked really hard and have turned up every day, so I will just give you what you need. After finding out that my qualifications were just going to be falsified, I mentioned it on an opening day at King's, who just stated that they only have 70 pupils per year. Hence, we have more time to help you out due to the smaller number of pupils compared to other universities. And we are always willing to help you out. So I got into one of the top 25 universities in the world with just an A level in maths. Now, the only reason I can see that they did this was because of diversity quotas, as I ticked quite a few boxes. And as you will see later on, once them boxes were ticked, I was just dismissed. It was when I joined King's and first went to them for help that I found out that this, "we are always willing to help," was just a big fat lie. And what they really did was just to have this already created conceptual character that only existed inside their heads, which also had much more easier problems than what I had, and problems that could be easily dismissed with a flick of their hands. All that would go on when having a meeting with them, or if I went to them for help, would be this cognitive commedia dell'arte would go on in their heads.
Commedia dell'arte was an improvised form of theatre. It's an oral tradition, so it doesn't start in the brain with language and text. It starts in the body by experiencing something. And when you commit 100% to the shape and the energy, you begin to get the essence of the character that you're playing. There are 3 types of character: masters and the servants who are masked,
where they would replace me with this conceptual character that only existed in their heads. And in this process, they would dismiss the problems of this imaginary, fictional person. And then I would be out of the door with my problems still existing. This conceptual character that they would replace me with was with someone who was struggling with the maths element of the course, plus the changing environment from going from a classroom environment to an environment where self-studying had to be performed. The only problem with this claim was the only educational training I had was in maths. So to say that I was struggling in the only subject I had an education in is really lazy. Just look at the sheer amount of work I did in my A-level maths compared to the small amount of work that was performed in my access physics lessons when some were actually done. Also, I performed my A-level maths as an external candidate, so I didn't switch from a classroom environment to an environment where independent learning had to be performed. I had gone from an environment where independent learning had to be performed to another environment where independent learning had to be performed to a lesser degree, so their argument just falls apart there. It was now the second year, but I was repeating the first year. Now I had come back to King's at the advice of a physics department, who then, when I came back and already sorted out a flat with fellow pupils, told me that I should have never have come back. In other words, they went against their original claim and said that I should have just repeated the 2 tests which I needed to do. This would have been a lot more preferable to me, as I could have gotten a job and used that money that I got from that job to get private tuition, which would have been a lot more helpful than just have a member of the King's Physics Department attack a conceptual character and pretend it was me.
You have my undivided attention.
But now I was here, and by returning home, they wasn't just messing me around, but also the fellow residents, as they would have had to foot the bill. And as this was the case, I had to beg to stay, for their sake. Now after my Christmas break, the admin staff started threatening me with expulsion from King's if I didn't pay the full tuition fees. I asked them whether this was a mistake, seeing as I wasn't doing the full course, so why did I have to pay the full fees? They assured me multiple times that this was not a mistake, and I would have to pay it or expect expulsion from King's. Seeing as I couldn't pay it, I left. Around March time, it became official and I was thrown out of the university. Cards not working and everything else you would expect from being thrown out. Later on in the month of June, I received a letter from the university telling me that they was going to take me to court if I didn't pay this fee. From receiving this letter, I skipped into the university to tell them to take me to court then.
Touch me and I'll sue. Come on, pug. Touch me and I'll sue.
They then burst my bubble by telling me that the problem had been sorted out in April, and I was just to ignore the letter. I had to ask, why haven't you got in touch with me about this then? And instantaneously I received a response vehemently, we haven't got around to it, have we? It's funny though, because they had gotten around to getting in touch with Student Finance England to rectify the transaction so they would receive the money straight away, but ringing up a student as soon as possible, giving him as much time as possible to learn the subject and revise for it, they didn't. It's amazing how these socialist institutions come over really capitalist when it suits them. I also wonder why Student Finance England didn't need me to sign a declaration on headed paper. I guess it only works one way, the usual way. As there was only days before the test from receiving this information that it was all just a mistake, I placed in a complaint over the following: the absence of help from the physics department. Now the burden of proof lies with a person or persons who make the positive claim. The burden of proof lies with them to prove that they did help me out. This is something that they tried to do, but I think it adds more weight to the fact that they didn't, as they had to take it to the ridiculous levels in order to defend this claim, like can be seen here in the outcome of my complaint, where they state that where I say I received no help, or I received no help, holds no merit because they organised over £1,500 worth of computer equipment through a meeting that took place in October 2010. The only problem with this is that I have a receipt 2 months before this saying that the order had been placed in, and the receipt stating that I received this equipment a month prior to this meeting, even before I set foot in King's, apart from an opening day. The reason for this was because it was organised by the University of Manchester. Usually, when people have to resort to ridiculous claims, it's because they're wrong. I pointed this out to them, which just got the response of, "You're being very confusing." This seems to be their go-to card when they have been stumped, as in order for their claim to be true, they would have to have access to a modified DeLorean. Getting me to come back to university. It's a bit difficult to prove this point, as I have lost the emails where they stated that I had to come back, but I have this response from the outcome of the complaint where they are responding to an email that I supplied at the time. I'm being thrown out of the university due to their mistake. Because of the placement of this complaint, I received an email to go and meet them in October 2012. In this meeting, they gave me an offer that I couldn't accept, being a placement on the foundation course, but I would have to get a full-time job as well as doing this full-time course. Now, I believe that they gave me this opportunity so that they could appeal to the half-truth later on in the process of this complaint and state that we gave him an opportunity, but regret to mention the fact that I would have to find a full-time job instantaneously as well as doing this full-time course, that they had set the bar at the feats of Icarus. They just kept saying I could get a job at McDonald's. They're always taking, that's what we say in America, one American member of staff would say, but I had been trying all summer and they wasn't. I don't think, or maybe they just didn't care about what was going on in the low skill market. Maybe because university educated staff are constantly going on about how they're the victims of change, that they might actually start to believe it now. But anyway, there was zero chance of this happening. Knowing about this meeting, I organised a meeting with student advice to talk to them about the meeting I had in the morning with the physics department. It was at this point that I was given 4 options by student advice. One of the options was to apply for undue student hardship, which the student advice told me I was guaranteed to get, and later on that day I sent an email saying to take this option, to the annoyance of the physics department. At first I couch surfed at a friend's flat, but that soon came to an end due to the size of the flat, so after a while I started living homeless on the streets and in homeless shelters, like stated many times before this. All through this process, even though they had the knowledge that I was rough sleeping on the streets, they kept putting off the application for this undue student hardship. They kept talking about the outcome of the complaint and refusing to place this application in until I received this outcome of this complaint. I should have received the outcome of the complaint in October, but it was now December, and every time I got in touch with them, it was the same. It will be 1 more week. It was at this point I had a go at student advice, and in reply he said that the outcome of complaint didn't even matter and he would start the process and send it out before Christmas. But if it didn't matter, why was we waiting for it? After Christmas I got in touch to see if he had sent it. He said no, but he was going to do it in a couple of days. Now, I had multiple meetings with student advice and we would talk on about what was going on with student finance, and he would present mind maps as if he just had the phone underneath his ear talking to a member of staff at Student Finance England discussing about my situation. To give you a spoiler alert, he hadn't even sent it off. February came and I received the outcome of the complaint. I wasn't happy with the outcome of this complaint as they was only offering me £1,500. The arguments which they made could easily be dismissed, like the one I stated before about the computer equipment. I wanted to take it further, but I have been living on the streets now for months. This is where student advice's trickery came into play. They had been telling me for quite a while that they was getting in touch with student finance and was in the process of getting me a student loan, like can be seen in this email here. Notice how they say getting in touch with them and chasing it up, as if the paperwork had already been sent out. Because if the paperwork hadn't been sent out, then what are you chasing up? They then said that this £1,500 could do me until I received this student loan in 5 weeks' time, and by the time this money had run out, you would have received your student loan. Knowing that this was the only way I could stay in the university, I reluctantly accepted. After I signed on the dotted line, I noticed radio silence came from student advice. No longer would they reply to my emails, and at one point I had to run down the university trying to catch a certain person who worked for student advice. It was now about 5 weeks after I signed on the dotted line and still nothing. It was then, when I was walking to Westminster Tube Station, when a charity that I had been talking to earlier in the year rang me up to ask me how I was doing with my new housing. I said, "What new housing?" And then they said, "The new housing Student Advice have sorted you out with," which I replied with, "They've not sorted me out with any housing. I have been living homeless on the streets." And it was at this point I realised what had been going on, and that they had been playing me for a fool. I rang up Student Finance England that day and found out what Student Advice was saying wasn't true. They wasn't even in touch with Student Finance England. Not only this, but there was no process even going on. They had just dangled an imaginary carrot in front of my face.
Here's your stick, your carrot.
I believe that they did this in order to place me in a situation of financial difficulty, so that I would sign the outcome of this complaint, as they knew I wouldn't sign it without the narrative of, "You will be receiving your student loan soon." 2 weeks later, I was able to get in touch with Student Advice after CCing my local MP, the Dean, and them into an email to the Physics Department. It was now April, months apart from when I first asked Student Advice to start the process. It had also been months apart from when they claimed it had been done, and it was at this point they started asking for information. A couple of weeks later I left. I no longer could afford to stay at King's. The £1,500 had ran out weeks ago, and I was back on the streets. I had caught a tooth infection and could not afford the antibiotics. I went and begged the staff at the university for £15, as the infection had spread quite far, as I had had it for months. They refused. I also couldn't guarantee that this behaviour from the staff wouldn't continue into the next years if I was to continue. A few weeks later, I did get the student loan, showing that they could have gotten at me all along, but chose not to. Not only this, but if I did stay, I would have received it in the summer holidays, far too late for it to be any good. I believe I was constructively dismissed, because why else would it take from October till April to get a member of staff to place the paperwork in order for me to get a student loan? This goes beyond a level of incompetence. It has to be purposely done while knowing the student was sleeping on the streets, coming in every day with his worldly belongings. Why else would they tell me, and also in black and white in the form of an email, that they had sent the paperwork off and they were chasing it up when they hadn't? At the end, they did prove that they could get me the money, as they did after I left. Too little, too late. So why didn't they do this at the start when it would have been helpful? Why did they wait until I left? Like I said, I don't believe I was supposed to agree to this offer that I couldn't accept. And when I did accept it after finding a way, they proceeded with Operation Constructive Dismissal and getting me to sign the outcome of the complaint by creating a fake narrative and placing me in a financial and physical difficult situation, making the £1,500 more appealing, like I was Tantalus permanently placed under the tree that bears the low-hanging fruit. This is why there was radio silence after this point.